Are you ready? So thank you all for sticking through to the last session of the afternoon. You're nearly there. Congratulations. So this is how to be strategic about publications. I am Rachel Borchard. I work in the library. And I thought we'd just take a quick moment to introduce ourselves and identify the names with the faces before we continue.
I'm Dan Kerr. I'm in the history department, and I'll say more about myself in German.
I'm David Pitts. I'm in public administration and policy.
I'm UJ Sophia. I'm listed as computer science. I am the chair of computer science, but I'm a physicist, and I'm the associate dean of research in the College of Arts and Sciences.
So we thought before we started that we would like to take a quick poll just to get a better sense of who are you and what would you like to learn about. They're really just who are you. So we're going to break it down into several categories. Students, including PhD, graduate students, and the like. How about pre-tenure faculty? Assistant professor level, associate professor level, and non-tenure track faculty. Does that sound? Are there any additional categories people would like to suggest? Staff, thank you. Thank you. Okay, yes. So let's see. First, students, graduate students. Rock on. Assistant professors, tenure? No one needing to write a tenure file anytime soon? Okay. Associate professors? Hi, Melissa. What did I say? Term faculty? And staff. Okay, so a fun mix. So hopefully everyone will get something out of this. Our intention is to not talk the entire time so that we have lots of time to respond to questions. But I think save them for the end. Does that sound good? Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to go up first. And what I'd like to talk about is why do you need to be strategic? And this is kind of helping to frame part of it. And I pulled a little bit from the faculty manual for all 0 of you that are tenure track faculty. But there is some updated wording in the scholarship expectations. So for those of you who are graduate students, this may be in your future. That all teaching units or academic units must have criteria that require creative, scholarly, and professional achievements of the highest quality and with national or international impact. And that italicized section is what we're really going to be focusing on, which is, how does one measure impact? It's a very fuzzy word, and there are some ways to try and defuzzify it, which is what I'm going to be talking about. So scholarly impact can be measured at multiple levels, including the journal level, the individual article or scholarly output level, and the author level, so the individual scholar. And today, because we are talking about how to be strategic about publications, I'm going to be focusing on journals. So how can you identify a high-impact journal to which you should submit your wonderful, shining manuscript? So start with the basics, and hopefully this sounds familiar to most of you. Impact factor. For a long time has been considered the gold standard for how one determines the relative impact of a journal. So if you are not familiar with that concept, memorize it now. Impact factor is the name of it. It is an actual number that is published by Thomson Reuters. They produce a database called Journal Citation Reports. You'll see this is a link, and there are several links in my PowerPoint, and I've already added it to the Blackboard site for this class. So for those of you who would like to go back and look at some of these things later, please do. So it's a library database that we subscribe to at AU, and it gives you impact factors for many, many journals. Yay. The general idea behind impact factor, and if you look on the lower left part of this slide, that's their general equation of how they calculate impact factor. So cites to recent items, so number of citations, divided by the number of recent items in that journal. The standard calculation is for a 3-year period. So for 1 year of a journal, how many citations have been generated for that one journal within the past 3 years? Does that make sense? It gets a little more complicated from there, but that's the general idea. So be higher the impact factor, it's essentially a higher ratio, right? Or if you want to think of it another way, a higher average number of citations per article that appears in that journal. Okay, so on the right is just a nice little chart showing within, this is I think biomedical science, some of the top impact factors for that discipline. One thing that is really important to note, let's see if it's, well, is that it is highly variable depending on discipline. And part of what I'm doing is trying to inform you of what these are, and the other half is informing you of why they're not everything, essentially. And if I had a lot more time, I do this as like a part of a 1 hour workshop, so I can't tell you everything that I would like to say. But for some disciplines, a great impact factor is like 2.5. If you are in biomedical research, a great impact factor, as you can see, is closer to 30. That's because different fields have different citation patterns, right? In some fields, you are publishing constantly. You may, if you are in charge of a research lab, be publishing 50 to 100 papers a year, right? Where if you're in, say, history, maybe it's more like 2 or 3, or to take library science as an example, having an article is a great accomplishment for us. And the impact factor will change accordingly, right? Because if there are fewer papers around, they won't be citing each other as often. So that's a really important factor to remember. A question I get a lot is, what is a good impact factor? And there's no one great answer for that, because it varies by discipline. And even within discipline, it's always kind of people have an intuitive sense, but I can't say, oh, for this one, it's this number. So I'm sorry. All right, so that was the gold standard for many years, and people started to say, this isn't entirely perfect for all disciplines. It was designed for science or STEM disciplines. That people started recognizing that it would be nice to have some alternatives. And Elsevier were the people to jump in and create a competitive sister product called Scopus, which we also subscribe to. So we have 2 kind of major people that are producing very similar numbers that we use to evaluate the quality of journals. So we have impact factor. We also have these much weirder sounding things, SJR, which stands for Scimago Journal Ranking, and SNP, Source Normalized Impact Per Paper. SJR is designed to be the direct competitor to impact factor. One nice thing about the fact that we have an alternative is that Scopus kind of bills itself as being more social science friendly, meaning if there is a journal that you are looking to publish in and you are not in the sciences, you are more likely to find it in Scopus than you are in journal citation reports. And this has happened quite a lot with people that I've been working with in the past couple of years. So that they'll say, there is no impact factor for my journal. How do I know how good it is? This could be an answer to that. They are not directly comparable to each other, however. So you should not say, well, this SJR is 5, that impact factor is 8, because it's apples and oranges. The reason being, in the lower left portion, that they use a different algorithm, which they do not make publicly available.
Am I in everybody's way? Are you sure? Okay. I feel like I'm the lowest here.
And I'm sorry that this is so technical. It's, but at the end I'll talk about where to get help with all of this. You're not alone. Hint, it's me. Anyway, it's based on Google and the idea that the most popular journals rise to the top, just as the most popular results in a Google search rise to the top. But they use a very similar algorithm. SNP is designed to flatten the impact, or the SJR, across disciplines so that you could compare one discipline's SNP rankings to another discipline's SNP rankings. So if you think of like a curve of SJR rankings and then flatten it, that would be SNP. It is not perfect. It doesn't equally flatten. You will still see like maybe 17 instead of 30 and maybe 4 instead of 3. But it's trying to allow for those cross discipline comparisons. All right. Everyone with me so far? All right. The other major way that we try and decide the quality of journals is not just the straight numbers, but how do they compare to other similar journals. So that's where journal rankings come into effect. So the same tools that we use to get the impact factor, the SJR, and the SNP can also be used to show the top journals for a specific discipline. Probably the main thing to know is, like I said, with the science versus social sciences, that's also reflected in how specific you get within the disciplines between the different products. So I don't know how much you can read of the journal citation report part, the lower right portion, but this is showing the top impact factors by multidisciplinary sciences, coming from JCR, which is very science heavy. Scopus does not have that as a discipline, multidisciplinary sciences. They have multidisciplinary, but not sciences. So the disciplines that they carve out for each other vary, if that makes sense. Generally speaking, if you're social sciences, Scopus is much more likely to have something that is more applicable to your field. But don't expect it to find your subdiscipline. It won't, probably. And this is, again, part of the limitations, right? Sometimes your discipline is just not well covered. And again, to use library science as an example, all three of these combine us with information science, which is like similar but not the same as library science. And there's no way to tease those two apart other than by going from journal to journal and me knowing that's library science, that's information science, that's library science, and creating my own essential list that isn't reflected in these products. So some big limitations. If you're a science person, it works pretty well. Google Scholar also has listings and rankings, and again, they tend to be much better. Oh yeah, there. This is what I was just saying. They are much better in the sciences. One of the things I like about it is that it will pull up a keyword list of journals, so you could search for a keyword that is specific to your subfield and get a list of all the journals with that keyword in the title, which is not perfect. But the idea being that eventually at some point you want to end up with a list of ranked journals in your field so you know which one's at the top, right? Because that's where you want to aim for ultimately. And there's some other considerations. So we have impact factor, SJR. We have how does it rank in my field? And then we also can include some other statistics. Not every journal is going to be in journal citation reports or Scopus. Most of them are in Google Scholar, but not everything is. So I kind of think of it as kind of a tiered favorites. So at the top, if we can get impact factor, great. If not, get SJR. Then can I see where it ranks in my field? If I can do none of those things, which happens on this campus all the time, acceptance rate can be another thing to look at. Some journals publish that on their website, most do not, but it is a general indicator of how choosy or selective they are. That can be kind of an indicator of their relative quality. So check with that publisher. Circulation statistics can be another one. This is discoverable by, I should have put a link to this and I will afterwards, a database called WorldCat. Stands for Worldwide Catalog. It's just a huge worldwide library catalog of how many libraries are subscribing to various things. So I could always look up my journal and say, well, you know, I don't have any of these impact factor things, but I see that there are 40, say, libraries worldwide that subscribe to them, including ones that I know have the strongest programs in my discipline, something like that. And then there's some other considerations as well that don't necessarily mean quantitative data. But the name of the game these days are to get that quantitative data when you can. It's not everything, and it's not going to automatically prove that you're the greatest scientist ever, but it is what people are looking for these days, or so I hear. Whew. So last, oh my gosh, I'm so confused. What do I do? There is assistance available. This happens to be my field of research and what I write on, and I'm very passionate about it, which I know is weird. But I want to help everyone be good at this, to get all of the data that they need to support themselves in, applying for jobs, for getting grants, for writing tenure files, all of that stuff. You need to have some measure of the impact that you've had so far. So let me help you get there. So I have business cards here. Feel free to take them or just write down my contact information. I don't have an office, so it is a metaphorical door, but I am open to you. I do offer a couple of workshops in the fall, but I will sit down and work with everybody for as long as you need until I get there, or until we get to a place where I'm helping so many people that I don't have time, and then we'll figure out a different way to help everyone. All right, so that is my bit, and I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Okay. I was invited to present today because I've been on the editorial board for the Oral History Review since, I think, 2007. And this particular journal, I don't even think makes any of the, it's a history, it's a subfield within a field that's pretty low already. So when I came up for tenure, I wish I talked to Rachel, but one thing I did find is that you can gather a lot of useful information directly by contacting directly the editors from the journal. And they also get a lot of help from the publishers of the journal. So most journals are, at least in my field, most journals are run by, are connected to professional associations and then are published by places, major university presses. And so those two, both the university press as well as the editors from the journal can help you also compile various qualitative information that can be helpful when the quantitative data is not there. But they can also give you the quantitative data such as acceptance rates. The main, I think, thing that I was asked to do is talk about the process of publishing. And really, in addition to impact factor, you really have to figure out what journals are going to be actually interested in your scholarship. And that's really the very first thing that happens to an article that's submitted to the Oral History Review, or as it comes across the transom, as we say. There's real, and I should say, there are several ways in which articles are solicited by journals. But the very first thing, once they're submitted, that happens is really to assess whether this article addresses the primary essential mission of the journal. And in the case of Oral History Review, it's clearly articulated on our website that it must deal with oral history theories, methods, etc. It must be a core part of it. It can't just be a substantive article that uses oral history as a source of evidence but is making a different kind of argument. It has to be about oral history, if that makes sense. And so anyone who's submitting an article to Oral History Review, most likely they're not doing so because they looked at the impact factor, but assuming they did so because it draws on a lot of oral history, they're really wasting their time if they haven't done some of that footwork ahead of time. There are a couple of ways in which you can do that footwork in addition to just looking at the website. And that is nearly all of these journals have an active presence at the annual conferences for the various professional associations that they're associated with or have some sort of affiliations. So my journal, I'm on the editorial board, and one of my tasks is both to sit at our table during the conference as well as to go out to various panels and try and solicit papers. So we actually go out and actively look for panelists who we think are doing really interesting, unique scholarship, and that is really, in my field, in field history, an essential way to get the word of your work out is to be active in doing those conference presentations. Really, all of my publications, well, I shouldn't say all, a lot of work in getting my publications has been done at annual conferences from the personal side. At the larger conferences, you're going to have really a lot of the various presses. So at the American Historical Association in my field, you're going to have all the book presses as well as the journal editors. They're all going to be sitting there, and you really should take the time to go and talk to these people. These are people who are very actively trying to increase the number of submissions that they have. They're very actively looking to see younger scholars and see who's doing interesting work, and they want to they want to publish your work if it fits within their mission, if it's good quality work. That's what they're out to do. And so going to talk to folks, seeing if it's a good fit is really a major step. We publish in Oral History Review really, well, multiple different kinds of articles, but we have basically the standalone article, and those are articles both that we go out and solicit as an editorial board, or the editors go out and solicit, the two editors also solicit, or just are randomly submitted, right? And then the other are special issues. And special issues are another thing that you can certainly think about, and those also are usually framed through conference presentations as well, where there's a unique synergy among a group of scholars that are doing something that's really of critical importance to the field, right? And so those take a little bit longer. I've published both individual articles and worked with special issues, and they take longer because you're really relying on lots of different people, but nonetheless, there's, I think, a lot of benefits to publishing that way as well too, in terms of developing that community of scholarship, developing references if you're going to be applying for jobs or getting external references for tenure review. Working with groups of people to do special issues is a good way also to get your name out and to build those relationships. That's very helpful. Then we also, I should let you know, one thing that you have to keep in mind, at least if you're in a field that values the publication of books. So in history, we obsess about, that's the kind of the gold standard, just get a book published. And there's a tension, and this is something you have to think through strategically, about publishing articles and publishing your book. Because if you pull apart your dissertation too much and publish it in too many different articles, there's going to be significant loss of interest in publishing it as a book. Whereas at the same time, having one or two good articles that really highlight your work and increase the interest in subsequent publication as a book is considered to be really really kind of the best practice, the way that most folks go about it. Publish one or two articles that really speak to essential issues of your work and are going to draw attention to the book after it's published. So you have to play that balance, and really having multiple conversations both with journal editors as well as with book editors from the various presses is important. And you can do that at the annual conferences for your various professional associations, at least in the field. I should qualify all of this. I only know about history, so I'm assuming this is relevant for many of the other humanities and perhaps some of the social sciences. I don't know how far the relevance extends. Once your article comes in, I should say we try and be really good. If your article just doesn't fit our mission, we try and send it back right away. However, I can speak from personal experience, and not with a journal article, but with a book manuscript, that I've had a book manuscript essentially sit on the desk of a editor at a major press for a year and a half before they told me that it just wasn't what they were. It didn't fit within their larger goals and objectives. And if you're an assistant professor, that's really critically important time. So spending, you have to also play that balance in terms of being a pest, making sure your book is going through the steps, and also just recognizing it takes a significant amount of time to get these peer reviewed and for them to go through the process. So once we get an article, it's going to take approximately 12 months, assuming we accept it and that the author is going through all the steps in a timely manner. It's going to take about 12 months for it to get published. I've participated in also there's another category of publication, at least in our field, and that's edited collections. Those can take 4 or 5 years, to get done. and so it's a fairly lengthy process. The book, most major presses that are dealing with manuscripts are going to take, from the point you submit your manuscript, about 14 to 16 months, assuming that it's it's already accepted, right? You have to realize as you're going through this process that it's going to be peer reviewed. The reviewers are usually never on time, but the editor's primary role is to kind of ride them and make sure they get their reviews in, and then you're going to have to address the comments that come back from those reviewers. In a large majority of cases, you're going to have to do something, and you're not going to have a long turnaround time. So you need to kind of expect at the least timely manner that you're going to have to work on this article or the book or whatever and trim it down by 5,000 words within a week or something along those lines is almost always the case, that you're going to have to do something. And then it goes, you submit it back, and then it gets, assuming everything goes well smoothly, it gets accepted, officially approved, then goes through the page proofs. And you have to read those through carefully too. I don't know how many times errors are actually added in the process of by some other third figure. Sometimes I don't even know. We don't even know how. We've had our journal, the title of our journal, like mistyped on the side of the journal. So all sorts of things can happen. You have to carefully check through your proofs and submit them again very quickly. There's always a very quick turnaround time. So that's at least part of the process. I certainly would recommend that you have kind of your feet in you're working in many different areas all at once, that you're having these communications in terms of kind of that long-term vision, and if you're in a book publishing field, of getting your book published. You're talking to those editors. You're dealing with articles are really much quicker to get through, and you're dealing with editors from various journals. You're really thinking about what are the relevant journals for your field, and shooting high. I think I know Perspectives, which is the journal for the American Historical, or the newsletter for the American Historical Association, had an article in this past issue that said, that the AHR, the American Historical Review, which is really kind of the top journal in our field, is always still actively looking for new work. So you should aim high, but at the same time be realistic. I have a friend who's always thinking his work should be at the top places, and this has really kind of prevented him from getting good publications under his belt that would have helped him develop professionally if he had been willing to go along with a very good press, but one that was not, in his estimation, at the top of his field. So you do occasionally, have to kind of scale back your expectations too, in order to get that professional development. And in any case, that's all I have.
Great. I have slides. I don't know if that can move down here or not.
Hopefully.
If I can knock over a pitcher of water at the same time, I will be very proud of myself.
Yep.
So I'm David Pitts. I am in the, again, Public Administration and Policy Department, which is both an applied and professional field and an interdisciplinary one, and where if you don't do your page proofs, you could easily be a pubic policy researcher. And so, assuming that's not your goal, I have to reiterate earlier comments on that. I should also put the largest disclaimer ever on this, and these are, I'm going to get specific about my opinions here in a moment, and so please don't take this to be any official communication from the university. It is not at all. Many might disagree with it. For what it's worth, here it is.
Me too.
So this summer I reviewed 3 promotion and tenure cases for other universities, and that was actually a really good experience for me. It's the first time I had done any of them. And because it really made me think about what people should shoot for at tenure time. And I came away from it thinking that the number one thing people need to do is to work to create a coherent body of work. And I know that sounds vague and it's not very helpful, but you gotta have a gimmick in some sense, and that gimmick can be whatever you want it to be, but you need an identity so people know who you are, right? If people don't know who you are, or if they know you do a lot of stuff, but they don't really see patterns across the stuff, then it's going to be hard for them to say at tenure time that they recommend tenure, because the whole idea of tenure is to get someone on faculty for life who can make this contribution to the literature that's sustained and important, right? And so you don't want to be scattered about it. And so right now is a very good time if you're a student or your early career to start thinking about what your identity is going to be. It doesn't have to always be the same. It'll shift over time. But I think it's important to think about whether you could say that your contribution is X, Y, or Z in 3 sentences. You should be able to do that. If it takes you 2 pages, you need to focus a lot more, right? So I think that's good practice for us to get into in developing our identity, to force ourselves to do an elevator speech of sorts, in that sense, about our publications. I have seen actually opportunistic people get in trouble by co-authoring here, there, and everywhere. And so, and in ways that don't necessarily benefit, again, the creation of a coherent body of work. So like, for example, you're gonna ask in your first job, if you get a tenure track job, how many papers do I need to publish in order to get tenure? And somebody, some fool, will tell you a number. And then that's gonna be the number in your head, and that ship sailed, and there you go. Well, so if you get to that number, whatever that number is, and we all know it's gonna be false, but anyway, you get to that number through all these co-authored papers that are all over the place, that does not help you get where you need to be. And so I think, again, making sure that things that you do are worthwhile and coherent, and toward a coherent strategy is important. So more specific than that, when it comes to choosing journals, I used to, when I was first out, look at scholars I wanted to be, see where they published, and look at the editorial boards of journals where they served. That way your work will get into groups where you'll feel at home, and where your work, I think, will get read, right? So you'll ideally submit to journals that regularly publish work like yours, because you ultimately want to get cited, and the journals want you to get cited because that's the impact factor part of it. It is exceptionally crucial right now. And I guess all else equal, you do want to aim high and work your way down the list, especially at the beginning if you have a little time. Now, if you're in year 4 of tenure and you've been told you're going to have to get 3 things out, probably not the best time to do that, but maybe start in the middle. Otherwise, why not start high? You'll get better reviews. You will not like the better reviews because they will make you very upset and mad. But your work will improve as a result, I think, and I think that can be helpful. Okay, so some issues and tensions that I see in this idea of publication. The number one thing that I see is the quantity-quality trade-off. And so you have 2 records, and I've dumbed these down so that we all know what they are. And you see the one on the left, there are 30 publications there. The other, there are only 5. But you see what they are. Which of these records would you rather have? Sometimes people, I think, err a lot on the side of the Us Weekly lifestyle, so on and so forth, because they're easier to get, and you feel better about yourself because you got a number and it's increasing. In my department here, and in top departments at other universities, we would much rather see the record on the right than the record on the left. Note that Vanity Fair has the Angelina article that all of the ones on the left have, so you can write about the same topic either way. We're not trying to censor what you study, but we want to censor the rigor that you use for it, and ultimately the quality of the placement when you're able to get it published. A second issue, I think, in social sciences, and particularly for fields like mine, is the idea of whether you should publish in a disciplinary or interdisciplinary journal. These 6 journals on the 2 sides have roughly, not identical, but roughly similar impact factors. So on the citation patterns, they're the same. But you will potentially be in a department where you have someone who's a PhD in political science who's going to value the APSR article far, 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 far more than he or she might value the J-Part article, right? And so you need to establish where you go, and in terms of the senior faculty in your department, what they're going to value and whether you will actually get credit for interdisciplinary papers. And this is something that I've seen vary quite a bit according to department, according to person. And this is where it gets bad. Unless you have a really good reason, you should think about whether these are good choices for you. Now, some of them are going to be good choices for you. And as students, in some cases, you probably will be doing one of these. I have done at least 3 things on this list, so I speak from my own experience. You will not get credit for encyclopedia entries in most fields, period. I don't think it's worth it. If they pay you for it, don't do it, because that suggests, if they have to pay a grad student to write it, what does that say about the quality of the publication? It's not very good. I wrote one of those as a grad student. I wanted the $50. It's not in my CV anymore. It kind of went down into the dungeon of publications. Book reviews may be helpful as a student. They take so long to write, and you're going to piss somebody off, right? So if you're a junior scholar, is it really worth it to sink all of that time into it just to make the author or one of the author's colleagues mad? Be careful about that one. I don't write many book chapters. When I look at files, I skip straight past them as if they're not even there. That's me and that's my field. That may not be the case for everybody. But book chapters, again, take a lot of time, and they rarely actually, I think, give you the benefit. And they certainly don't get cited with the same regularity that an article would cite. It took the same amount of time. Technical reports, the similar thing. Journals with no impact factor, I think, again, have to have a really good reason to send there. There may be a reason that they're not indexed and there's no impact factor, but you need an explanation. And I would steer clear of the open access journals altogether. My own opinions. So just a few other assorted issues finishing up. There are some referee journals that have an applied focus. For fields like mine, it's a professional field. Sometimes that's helpful and valued. Sometimes they're viewed as less rigorous and not valued. Again, something I think to just ask questions about. There are also lots of reputational studies that are put out about journal quality. In public administration, there's a paper that was published 4 years ago that was based on a survey of journal editors. I put the journal ranking from that study in my tenure packet with the other stuff. My view is as much information as possible from as many different sources to try to demonstrate the quality of the publication. And so the impact factors, as you noted, it's not the only way to go about it. Co-authorship is tricky. Some fields it's alphabetical. Some fields the first author's the one that did most of the work. You should be careful about that and ask questions about that. And if you're working on a paper with a faculty member for students, ask what the norm is and make sure you're not being taken advantage of. We faculty love to work with our students and we treat you as colleagues, but some of us sometimes might treat you as less of a colleague than you deserve. Make sure you fight for your right to have your name where it should be. I already mentioned journal articles and book chapters a moment ago. And this is my last point, but this is one of my personal pet peeves. The conference paper to publication ratio. So we get these CVs for our jobs sometimes where this person has given 88 conference papers that have turned into 2 publications. So it's all good to be out networking and talking about what you're doing, but if it's not going to actually hit pages, I think you need to think long and hard about whether you should be out at the conference or staying at home writing your stuff up and making sure it gets in somewhere. And so again, just one thing to think about as you move forward and strategizing. And thank you, I appreciate it.
All right. Being the last one up, I get to say, yeah, they were right about a lot of stuff, and I agree with it. So I'll try not to repeat too much of what everybody else has said. So impact is a word that's come up a lot here. And impact is a huge thing at this university right now, and it's a huge thing everywhere right now. There are a lot of talks at the dean provost level about impact and how we improve it and how we make people's work, even if it's fantastic, how do we make more of an impact with it than we previously had. So impact, impact, impact is sort of what people are sort of glommed onto now. It's not only here, it's everywhere. And there are many different ways of measuring it. 10 years ago, most people didn't know a whole lot about impact factors. It was harder to find them. Definitely was harder to find out individual people's impact as much. You can still find journal impact, but individual people's impact not as much. All that's changed. So there are so many metrics out there right now to find out the impacts of journals and publication locations and people that you really have to think about that whenever you're publishing. Something that David said is that you should find you said, you didn't say niche, but basically you were saying find your niche in the field. Absolutely right. So basically at this institution and a lot of institutions, the idea is by the time you come up for tenure, you should be a recognized expert in the field. And what you're an expert in can be a tiny, tiny, tiny thing, but people should know that if you wrote a paper on this topic, it was good, or if they want to know something about this narrow topic, you're the person that they go and they look up. You want to be known for something, and that gives you the coherence to your CV, and it does make you that expert in the field. And that's where people, your external letter writers, will say, yes, I know this person has made an impact in the field. It might be tiny, it might be narrow, but as long as it's important and you're the person that's known for it, that'll work in your favor. Where to publish? Dan talked about the times of publications and that your publication can sit on a desk for a long time. In the sciences where I'm more familiar, you're never going to have your thing sitting on somebody's desk for a year and a half, but you might have it sitting on a desk for a while, or you might go through a process. The highest journals, Science, Nature, they have a pre-approval process basically that doesn't take too long, and they might send something back and say, no, not for us. But then if they say, okay, we're gonna send it out to some referees, then that process can take a bit of time. Why does that matter? Well, there are a couple of reasons why that can matter. One, which Dan also mentioned, is if you're coming up for tenure or contract renewal or promotion or whatever it is, something that's been submitted really counts for absolutely nothing in the viewpoint of the committees that are looking at you. It has to be accepted. It doesn't have to be published yet, but it has to be accepted. So keep that in mind. If you're sort of close to a deadline, that might influence a little bit whether you go for that real pie in the sky place to send it, or whether you're more realistic, shall we say, in your expectations. Another thing is for those in the funded fields that lots of times in order to get funding in your field, you send out a grant proposal. If you don't have the publication that backs it up, right, the publication is off being reviewed, the results that you need to make your point for your external grant, it's not out or at least accepted, it doesn't count for anything again. So, you know, those grant opportunities oftentimes come up once a year. You want to make sure you don't miss a year of grant opportunity because you sent it to the wrong journal ahead of time with a place where you maybe had no shot of really getting in. Something in my field, astrophysics, there are different journals that specialize in different things, and some of them, you know, in my particular field, which is abundances of different elements in the universe, there's one journal that does a lot more of it than the other journals, but it's not the best journal. So at different times in my life, I have published in either the higher ranking journal or the lower ranking journal, depending on sort of whether I wanted to have more of a conversation with the people that are directly in my field and a little bit out of my field, but this is the place where they would go to learn about it, or whether do I send it to the higher ranked journal that sort of is my stuff touched on a little bit less so, and less of the conversation in my field was in that journal, but it was more highly ranked. So there's sometimes pros and cons to publishing in different places, and depending on where you are and what you're going after, the lower ranked journals sometimes might be better as long as it's not too much more lower ranked compared to the upper ranked journal. Open source in the sciences, depending on the open source journal, may not be bad. So that's a field specific thing. There are some very good ones in the sciences. What you do is you check the impact factor and you make sure that it's a good one before you send it. One of the good things about sending something to open source is that more people have access to it, right? There are a lot of places that don't have access to all the journals. Some of the expensive journals, places don't have access to them. So in a way, it makes it more accessible to more people. On the other hand, there are a lot of other places out there where you should definitely be putting your articles when they get accepted. So in physics, there's a site, Archive, where you can just place your papers once they've been accepted. In fact, they don't even have to be accepted. It's just a place where anybody can plunk their papers, and they're available immediately, either upon acceptance to a journal, or some people send them out, put them out there even before it's accepted to get people's comments. That's a scary thing to do. I don't do that, but I put them out there as soon as they're accepted. And that's a free site. Anybody can download them. The publishers haven't clamped down on this yet, and I'm not sure why, but it's a good way of getting your stuff out there. Other places are places like ResearchGate, right? Do you guys know about ResearchGate? Anybody? ResearchGate. ResearchGate.com. Get on there and see if you're on there or not, especially if you have published, even as a grad student. If you have published, see if you're on ResearchGate. It tracks the publications of individual authors. And what you do on ResearchGate is you connect with other authors in your field. And basically, if you publish something new and it shows up on ResearchGate, it tells all the people that you're connected to that you just published something. And they will look at it, and they may cite it, because it may be the fastest way that they know about it. So there are ways to connect that way. Another thing that you should do is, again, if you've published, make sure that you're on Scopus, and that that the articles that you've written are correctly identified to you. So I'm UJ in some places, I'm Ulysses John in other places, I'm Ulysses J in other places. So I'm published under several different names. It's not much of a problem for me. There aren't a whole lot of Ulysses Sophias out there, so it was easy for me to gather all my articles under these different names and say, yeah, they're all me. But if you're, Jane Smith, there might be a bunch of Jane Smiths out there, and they don't know how to categorize a different Jane Smith. And you can get on there, onto these sites, and say, these are mine, and that makes it easier for people to look you up and find you and find which articles are relevant to you. And it's a good idea to do that sort of thing. If you publish, you are represented in a lot of these different databases, and you may be correctly represented or you may be incorrectly represented. In lots of those places, you have control over how you're represented. Okay? So have a look at those. Blah, blah, blah. For those of you in the College of Arts and Sciences, that's the only one I can speak to. If you have an article that you would like published in a higher ranked journal, but it costs more money, or it costs money and you don't have that money, you should come to the dean's office, specifically to me, and say, I have this article, I'd like to submit it to this journal, it will cost $2,000. Otherwise, I have to submit it to this place, which is going to be free. I will look at that, and if we can swing the money to help you publish in a higher ranking place, then we will do that. So basically, there are ways potentially of getting your work into higher ranked journals if money is the issue that's holding you back, at least in the College of Arts and Sciences. If you're not in the College of Arts and Sciences, I would ask your dean's office anyway and see what they say about that. Blah, blah, blah. The other thing that Rachel didn't mention, she mentioned rankings for journals and things like that. And by the way, I'm on some of these sites like Scopus several times a week in the dean's office looking at different people who are applying for jobs here or for going up for tenure or promotion and things like that. So these things matter. We are looking at these things all the time, and people everywhere are looking at these things, and when you apply for jobs, people will be looking for these things. In the sciences, and I don't know about other disciplines, the H-index is something that people look at a lot. I don't know if people are familiar with the H-index. H-index means you have an H-index of 1 if you've had one paper that's been cited at least once. H-index is 2 if you've had 2 papers that have been cited at least twice each. 3 papers cited at least 3 times each, you have an H-index of 3. And that's a way that a lot of scientists evaluate people, either they're coming up for jobs or tenure or promotion, is to look at their H-indices. So it's kind of fun if you look up your faculty members or people that you know in the field or people who you reference all the time to see what their H-index is, and you can go to Scopus and you can do that. Okay? So I think that's it.
Sorry, can I jump in and just
Please.
fill in some blanks?
Oh,
Sorry.
I left
no,
it
no, no,
blank.
no. Outside of science, how that can translate to some other people. Just
Okay.
some other peer networks like ResearchGate that you have friends, you publish there, they're notified. Academia.edu is a big one, and SSRN, especially for the social sciences. And Google Scholar is another place where you have an academic profile that you can look and see what it thinks is attributable to you, and you can change it actively. Scopus as well. Web of Science is another one that keeps track of citations by author. And if they have you incorrectly, you can submit a request for them to change things that are or are not you. H-index is applicable to any field, but like pretty much all of these impact things that we've talked about, impact factor, H-index, rankings, have all been designed for the sciences. So they work really well in the sciences, but the further away you get from the sciences, the more they start to break down and be less applicable. So I don't think fields outside of science look at H-index quite as heavily, but it is just designed to be a measure of quality over time, that you have consistently published articles that are highly cited. And in disciplines where you aren't publishing as much, the H-indexes are going to be lower. So, sorry, those are just my my translating thought. So I think it's time for questions. I think we've got about half an hour or so. 20 minutes? 20 minutes, sure. Yeah.
And can you talk a bit more about Scopus? Is it scopus.com?
Yes. Scopus, it is again, library database that we subscribe to. It's something that you have to pay lots and lots of money for it, and our administration recognized the value in it and forked up the dough. Yay. So if you go, it's a link in my presentation, so if you go to the Blackboard page, you can get the presentation, get the link that way. From the library homepage, which is american.edu/library, near the upper right corner, I should just show you, huh? Hang on.
It's available in Anne Conference Blackboard.
Yes, the Anne Farron Conference Blackboard page. Oop, I'm so sorry.
You're all right.
So exciting for a
I am going to move it.
All right. Oh. So, and this is my good friend Martin. Yay. Library homepage, under this research section, we have search databases. This is where you can access all of the library databases we have. This includes journal citation reports, it includes Scopus, it includes Web of Science, all of those fun things. So then we go to S for Scopus, and right there. You can access this for on or off campus. If you're off campus, it will ask you to log in unless you have the VPN program downloaded. For those of you who don't know, vpn.american.edu, it's a way to emulate on-campus access to all of our library resources. So, maybe we'll get into Scopus. Yeah.
Can I ask you another question?
Mhm.
So the other one was about disciplinary versus interdisciplinary journals. I think it was.
Yeah, what's that?
Oh, sorry. It was, so can you talk a little bit more about when one is better than the other?
I think it's all about preference, frankly, and it's preference not necessarily of the author, but of those who are reading the work. So, for example, if your area in which you do work is, so one of my areas is racial, ethnic diversity and public policy. Okay, so that's a sub area that could arguably be political science, but political science journals, the mainstream ones, don't tend to publish it very much. So I could send the work there, but it probably wouldn't get in, and that's something I know only because I've asked questions and talked to people about it, and gone to these types of things at conferences. So most conferences have something like this. You should go to those if you can. But I don't think objectively there's one's better than the other. It's the eye of the beholder, really. The quality of the scholarship's often similar. It's just maybe the interdisciplinary draws from more literatures. So, sorry, that's a non-answer. There's not an answer, in my opinion. Maybe the others have one that's more tidy.
That point you said at the beginning of your talk of developing who are the community of scholars you really want to have your identity linked to, and they're just different community of scholars that are associated with different journals. So, and that's something I don't know. I was talking to Pat after Heidi earlier today, and she said when she went up for tenure, her thought was, you know what, if they don't like what I do, then screw them. I'll go somewhere else. You know, but there's something to that. I mean, that
Something.
you have
Maybe
to.
not everything.
Not everything. She's a little bit. But the point is, you have to develop what kind of scholar you are. Not just be publishing all over just to get your your publication numbers down. You have to really have that identity that David talked about earlier, and I think that's also linked to the community of scholars you're going to be associated with. I should also just say two other quick thoughts. One is the press. So you may have, again, I'm from a book discipline. You may think, oh, I just really love the books that are coming out of Cambridge University Press. They've just been outstanding books. They're really influential in my thinking. Well, those could have been, and again, this is history, those could have been published 5 or 6 years ago. They have a new editorial, focus, and they don't even publish books on this topic anymore that they were publishing in that area. So you also have to really see what's going on now. Lastly, I'll just say this from being on the editorial board of the Oral History Review. I agree 100% with the encyclopedia articles. I think you probably should not waste your time unless there's really an important relationship you have to sustain by doing an article for somebody. But I do think that while book reviews aren't going to advance your career, they're kind of part of your professional responsibility. That I don't think you should see your book reviews as this is something that's going to get me the job or this is going to get me tenure. But that's part of the peer review process, and as a community of scholars, we have to review each other's work. As a junior scholar, I think you should probably focus less on them. So it's not that I totally disagree. And I do think the way that you can make it less of a waste of time is if you choose the books you review carefully and works that will be helpful as you're thinking about your own scholarship. Yeah.
Also, thank you so much. It was very, very helpful. Go back, like maybe 2 to 3 years before your tenure applied. Is there anything that you wish you didn't do it, or is there anything that you wish you spent your time differently in terms of research, publication, teaching, anything?
I wrote 2 book chapters I wouldn't have written. Hence the book chapter with the slice through it.
I met somebody at a conference who asked me, she was a series editor who asked me to submit my manuscript to the series she was editing, and I thought, oh, that's a great idea. And a year and a half later, I got, after several maternity leaves, from the actual editor from this press, I realized that that was a big mistake. And actually, in most cases, that's really unusual. I think that was just really, in my case, the press was very unprofessional. Most presses will tell you very quickly, and you should be thankful. I should also say, rejection is okay. Just put your work out and don't be afraid of rejection, because you can learn from the critiques, and that's part of engaging in scholarship.
And sometimes you won't learn from the critiques. You'll learn that the reviewer was sad after he read my paper, and that it was clearly I'm depressing the field with my work. That's good to know. That's very good to know.
Or you'll find frustration, like where your particular piece may not be the latest fad in your field of scholarship, but I write on issues of poverty and homelessness. When I started off my project, it wasn't really fashionable, but after the the economic collapse, and now all discussion of income inequality, it's once again fashionable. So, but you can't scholarship building your reputation and your identity has to be much deeper than that. You can't, the folks that are going to start building an identity based on what the fads are today, by the time they're ready to really build that identity, those will be passé. So it's somewhat of a tricky balance you have to play.
I got involved with the space instrument that went up on the space shuttle that got delayed for years because of the shuttle exploding. So that was a bad move.
Don't do
Kind of hard
that.
to know that ahead of time.
It's delayed publications.
So those are anything that delays publication.
Anything that delays publication. I mean, I gave you a couple reasons why with grants or with tenure or something like that coming in, but there's also just the idea of being scooped, right? I know some people who, just as they've been finishing up their article, really days away from submitting, something comes up on the archive on this free site that I told you about, where and it's like, oh, it's gone. So time makes a difference.
I have some interrelated questions, I guess, and I know there may be more than one of you can answer these questions, but I'm an art historian where things are very murky. And I'm glad that the Sciences has this great system, but we do not. Unless you can help me figure out that we do, I would love that. So recently, because the Sciences, there's been such an emphasis on impact, and I feel like it's coming over to the humanities, that I feel great pressure to now go back and reconstruct my list of citations. And I started publishing in 1988, so this is a long list of citations. Well, not that long, but better than I thought it was, it turns out, because I hadn't really been looking, And so part of the problem is finding a good way to look at sources that are not going to be in any of these databases, like exhibition catalogs or essay collections. And this is where I worry that this idea of book chapters might be a little bit different for our history, and because publishing in a chapter in an edited collection, that's a peer-reviewed article, right? So how can or is there a way to find these things more easily than going through every volume and looking through the footnotes and the bibliography?
Yeah, so science definitely leads the way when it comes to impact. Everyone's starting to catch up. There are a couple of places that now try to track book citations. Google Scholar is the one that does it the best.
I just started that yesterday.
Yay! Yeah, if you haven't gone to Google Scholar, no matter the discipline, go and see and create a profile. And people go there really often. I'm sure many of us in the room do too. The other one, Web of Science, now has a book citation index. We do subscribe to it, so you can always go and look up. They do it at the chapter level and at the whole book level. There are way more things that are not published than they have in there. So don't get your hopes up. And this is kind of general advice for everyone in every discipline, is that we can't cover every situation for every person because it really changes. Like what if I'm in communications and it's actually really important to have a social media impact? How do I display that? That's a whole different set of things that have nothing to do with anything we've talked about, right? So I highly recommend just talking to some of the senior people in your department, the people who will ultimately be the ones that will be evaluating you, and ask them, what are you looking to see? And sometimes the answer is still, I just need to see that you have it because we have no better way. But for books, again, the number of libraries that own a copy could be something. The fuzzy metric of prestige of the book publisher, and there's no ranked list unless there's been something like a survey in your field that says, what are the top publishers. Yeah, it's hard, but talk to other people, see what is kind of the standard right now in your field, because it will change. Other questions? Have we enlightened you at all, or just muddied the waters? Oh, just a reminder to fill out the evaluation forms that were given to you, hopefully as you entered. And yeah, be proactive, start early, be in control of your career. Yeah, please.
One thing that we didn't really touch on, one whole, and I don't think there's a clear answer to it because it's in such flux, is the issue of digital scholarship. It has to do with this issue of open access, and we see a little bit of tension here, but nearly all professional associations, at least that I'm involved with, have significant debates about the direction of this kind of scholarship. So so I do think it's something that older or senior scholars are probably not going to be our best advisees on, because the fields are really being driven right now as we speak. What does it mean to have I do think at the end of the day, you have to have that scholarship down. That's got to be the basis of your identity. But what about your identity, scholarly identity on Twitter and through blogging and et cetera? Those things probably, could fall into the waste of time piece, but they could also be a part of developing identity, a new media identity, and that's social media identity, and that's something that I think is really in flux right now.
If I can add to that with a small plug, the library actually has a series on scholarly communications where we explore these very issues. Kathleen Fitzpatrick is from the Modern Language Association and will be our next speaker. But scholarly communication is kind of the term, and it's changing, and what it means for all of us is definitely a matter for discussion. Next week? Oh, wow. Soon. The week after next. So keep an eye out for that. It will be in the library, and it will be fabulous. Any final thoughts, questions? Okay, well, thank you all for coming.